I found my wife's secret $300, $0 inheritance from her ex at her parents' house. And now she's suing me for half of our family home after I discovered she's been secretly transferring funds to her lawyer for a divorce settlement I never agreed to. I never thought I'd be the guy sitting here telling a story like this, but here we are. It all started with a gut feeling that something was off, like a tiny, nagging itch in the back of my mind that I kept ignoring. My wife had always been the type to keep her cards close, but over the last few months I started noticing little things. She was more secretive with her phone, hiding texts, and sometimes she'd go out for drinks with her friends and come back looking too pleased with herself. I didn't have concrete proof, but I could feel it, like the ground was shifting beneath me, and I didn't know why. Our marriage was pretty solid on the surface. We had a decent life, a nice house, good jobs, and two kids who kept us busy. I worked as a project manager and was a lawyer. She was sharp, confident, and always had a way of making herself seem like she had everything under control. But lately, I'd catch her lying about little things, like where she was or who she was with, and I'd get that strange feeling in my stomach. I brushed it off, thinking maybe I was just overthinking it because I was stressed at work or tired. But then, one day, I stumbled across something that changed everything. It was a random Sunday afternoon. I was cleaning out the garage, trying to declutter, when I noticed a small, battered envelope tucked behind some boxes. Out of curiosity, I pulled it out. Inside was a stack of old bank statements, receipts, and a few handwritten notes. The handwriting was unfamiliar, but the amounts caught my eye immediately. There was a transfer of $300, $0 from his account to someone named L. Carter, a lawyer, over the past 2 months. I froze. My mind raced. What the hell was this? I looked at the dates, just after I had caught her sneaking around a few times. It didn't add up. I started digging deeper. I logged into her bank account when she wasn't looking. Sure enough, there were multiple large transfers to the same lawyer's account. I did some quick research and found out that this L. Carter was a divorce lawyer, and the transfers were labeled as retainer fees and settlement payments. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. My wife was planning to leave me, and she was apparently preparing for a divorce she never told me about. And get this, she'd been secretly transferring money to her lawyer for months, trying to hide it from me. My mind was spinning. I felt betrayed, sick to my stomach. All those nights I thought she was out with friends. She was probably meeting with her lawyer, plotting her escape. But what really hit me hard was the revelation about the inheritance she'd gotten from her ex, her parents' house, which she'd been hiding from me all along. I found a hidden safe in her closet and discovered a folder with legal documents and bank statements showing she'd inherited over $300, $0 from her ex, a guy she dated before me. She'd kept it all secret, claiming she didn't want me to worry about her family stuff, but instead she'd been squirreling away money for her divorce. That was the moment I knew. I couldn't stay silent. I confronted her that night, cornered her in the kitchen. I showed her the evidence I'd uncovered, her secret inheritance, the transfers, everything. Her reaction was a mix of shock and anger. She tried to deny everything at first, saying I was mistaken, that I was paranoid, that I was reading too much into it. But I had the proof right there. I told her I knew about the inheritance, about the transfers, and that I wasn't going to be played for a fool anymore. She looked at me with that bitchy smirk she always had, like she thought she was smarter than everyone else. She said she was entitled to the money because it was her inheritance, and the transfers to her lawyer were just her legal expenses for a divorce she was planning to file. She insisted she never cheated, never lied, and that I was just jealous or paranoid. But I knew better. I saw through her lies. I knew she'd been screwing around, planning her exit and secretly stacking her cash. Money I thought was ours, money I worked hard for, was now being funneled into some lawyer's account. That night, I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. The shock, the anger, the betrayal, it all hit me at once. I'd been with for over 10 years, and in a matter of hours, I realized she'd been planning her escape behind my back the entire time. How could she do this to me, to us? I couldn't sleep that night, replaying everything I'd found, trying to make sense of it. The woman I thought I knew was a lie. The person I'd trusted with my life was secretly plotting her divorce, secretly taking my money, secretly betraying everything we built together. I felt so broken, so furious, and so helpless at the same time. I knew I had to decide what to do next, but honestly, I was just overwhelmed. I had no idea how deep this rabbit hole went, or how much more I'd find out. All I knew was that my marriage was over, and I was now face to face with a betrayal I didn't see coming. The next few days were a blur. I couldn't focus at work, kept replaying everything I'd uncovered, and every time I looked at, I saw her differently, like she was a stranger. Wearing my wife's face, I kept asking myself how I missed the signs, how I didn't see it coming. We had been through so much together, and yet she was planning her escape, secretly building her own little empire of lies and money behind my back. It was like finding out the person I loved was a complete stranger, and it hurt more than I can really put into words. I decided I couldn't just sit around and do nothing. I needed to get to the bottom of it, figure out what else she was hiding, and prepare for what was coming next. But I also knew I had to be careful, was manipulative, and I wasn't about to let her spin some story to make herself look innocent. So I started digging through her phone, her emails, anything I could find. It wasn't long before I discovered more. One night, I snuck into her study while she was out meeting a client. I found a folder on her laptop labeled Divorce Settlement with detailed notes and draft agreements. There were references to splitting the house, the inheritance, and even a plan to keep me out of the loop as much as possible. I saw emails between her and her lawyer, her pushing for a quick divorce, trying to get the best deal for herself. The tone was cold, calculating. She kept calling me the husband like I was just some obstacle to be removed. That was when I realized I had to do something drastic. I couldn't let her just walk away with everything she wanted: my house, my savings, the inheritance she'd secretly taken from her ex. I started planning my next move. I contacted a lawyer myself, a good one who specialized in divorce and asset protection. I wanted to know what I was up against. I also decided to run a full financial audit, get a clear picture of all her accounts, her assets, her secret funds. I had to be prepared for her to try and hide more. Meanwhile, kept up her act of innocence. She would cry, say she was so hurt that I'd accuse her of cheating and stealing. She'd call me paranoid, claim I was overreacting because I didn't trust her. But I knew better. Every time she threw a fit or cried about how much she loved me, I saw right through it. That bitchy smirk, the way she twisted her words, it was all part of her game. She was trying to keep me off balance, trying to make me doubt myself like she always did. One day, I caught her in a lie about her whereabouts. She said she was at a client meeting, but her phone GPS showed she was at her lawyer's office. I confronted her with it, and she got defensive, tried to brush it off. But I wasn't buying it anymore. I knew she was actively planning her escape, and I was going to stop her. I wasn't just going to sit here and let her walk away with my life. That's when the real shock came. I found out she'd been secretly transferring money from our joint account to her lawyer's account, more than I initially saw. Over the past few months, she'd moved close to $1 million, all hidden behind fake receipts and coded emails. She'd been draining our savings, preparing for her new life without me. I felt sick. This wasn't just an affair. It was outright theft and betrayal on a massive scale. I decided to confront her again, but this time I was ready. I told her I knew everything about the inheritance, the transfers, the secret accounts. I laid it all out, and her reaction was nothing short of chilling. She looked at me with that bitchy smirk, like she thought she could manipulate her way out of it. She said she was entitled to her inheritance, that she'd been planning her future for months, and that I was just an obstacle to her happiness. She accused me of being paranoid and controlling, even said I was the reason she'd been cheating. I couldn't believe the audacity. At that moment, I realized I had to make a choice. I couldn't keep living like this with her lying and scheming behind my back. I was angry, yes, but also devastated. I loved her once, but now I saw her for who she really was, a selfish, manipulative woman who'd done everything she could to screw me over. I knew I had to protect what was mine, and that meant taking serious legal steps. I hired a lawyer, started the process of freezing her accounts, and prepared for a legal fight over the house, the inheritance, and everything else she'd tried to hide. Honestly, I felt a mix of rage and heartbreak. It was like losing my wife all over again, but worse because I knew she'd been lying to me from the start. I kept asking myself how I'd let it get this far, how I didn't see the signs sooner. But at the same time, I knew I had to be strong. I had to fight for what was rightfully mine. The betrayal cut deep, but now I was determined to make her regret what she'd done. I wasn't going to let her walk away with everything, her lies, her money, her future, without paying a price. Over the next couple of weeks, everything escalated quickly. I hired a lawyer and things moved faster than I expected. I had to get a court order to freeze her accounts, and I started gathering every piece of evidence I could find: emails, bank statements, texts. My goal was to prove she'd been secretly transferring money, hiding assets, and planning her divorce behind my back. It was a brutal process, but I knew I couldn't let her get away with it. Of course, played the victim. She was calling me every day, crying, saying I was ruining her life, accusing me of paranoia and trust issues. She insisted she loved me and that I was just jealous because she'd been working so hard to get her divorce settlement. She even tried to guilt-trip me, saying I was destroying our family over nothing. But I wasn't falling for it. I had all the proof and I knew her game. I knew she'd been lying for months, secretly planning her escape, and now she was trying to spin it as if I was the villain. One night I decided to confront her directly. I told her I knew about the inheritance from her ex, how she'd inherited over $300, $0, and kept it hidden, and about the large transfers to her lawyer. I laid everything out calmly but firmly. I told her I was going to fight her for the house, for the inheritance, and for the money she'd stolen from us. Her reaction was pure contempt. She looked at me with that bitchy smirk like she thought she had already won. She said she'd see me in court, that she was entitled to her fair share, and that I'd regret trying to stop her. That's when I realized she wasn't going to stop. She was serious about walking away with everything, and she was willing to burn everything down to do it. I started to feel the weight of what was happening. I'd been betrayed, and now I was fighting for my life, my home, and what little dignity I had left. I had to be strategic. I hired a forensic accountant to track every transfer, every hidden account, every dollar she'd moved. I wanted to make sure I had every detail before going to court. Meanwhile's lawyer was pushing her to settle quickly. She was demanding half the house, claiming her inheritance was part of her separate property, even though I knew that wasn't how it worked legally. She was trying to spin it that I was trying to steal her inheritance, which was total BS. I knew she'd also been trying to get me to sign some kind of quick settlement agreement, hoping I'd just accept her terms and walk away. But I wasn't having it. I wanted full transparency, and I wanted her to be held accountable for everything. The more I uncovered, the more disgusted I became. I found out she'd been secretly transferring money into accounts under different names, funneling assets to hide her true wealth. She'd even been paying her lawyer with money she'd stolen from our joint account, money I thought was for our family, for the kids, for our future. I felt so betrayed, so angry that I could barely breathe sometimes. It was like discovering the person I loved had been a complete fraud all along. One night I sat alone in my office, staring at the mountain of evidence I'd accumulated. I realized that I was going to have to fight her in court, that this wasn't just about money anymore. It was about justice, about making her face the consequences of everything she'd done. I knew she'd try to spin the story her way, that she'd paint herself as the victim, but I was ready. I had everything documented, every lie she'd told, every dollar she'd stolen. I was determined to come out of this stronger, even if it meant losing my marriage. Honestly, I didn't care about saving the relationship anymore. I just wanted her to be held accountable for her actions. But even as I prepared for the legal battle, I couldn't shake the feeling of heartbreak. I kept asking myself what I'd done wrong, how I'd missed all the signs. I kept wondering if there was any way to fix this, or if I should just walk away and start over. The betrayal ran so deep that I didn't see a way back. All I knew was that I was done being the fool. I was done being the victim. And I was ready to fight for what was mine: my house, my money, my dignity. The court date finally arrived after what felt like an eternity. I was nervous but mostly angry. Sitting in that courtroom, I could see sitting across from me, her face tight and smug, like she already thought she'd won. She was trying to act composed, but I could see the flicker of annoyance in her eyes when she saw the mountain of evidence I had prepared. I knew she was counting on her lawyer to spin some story to make me look like the villain, but I wasn't going to let that happen. My lawyer laid out everything: proof of the inheritance, the transfer records, the hidden accounts, the emails. We showed how had been secretly transferring funds, trying to hide her assets, and how she'd been planning her divorce for months. She had no real defense. Her lawyer tried to argue that the inheritance was her separate property, that she was entitled to half the house, and that the transfers were legal expenses. But my lawyer shot every point down. We had the proof, and the judge saw it. The reaction was predictable. She started crying, claiming I was trying to ruin her, that I was just bitter because she wanted a divorce. She said she loved me, that she never cheated, and that I was just jealous. But the judge wasn't buying her act. The evidence was too overwhelming. When it came time to decide, the judge ruled in my favor on most points, awarding me full control of the house, ordering her to return the stolen funds, and halting her attempts to claim half of everything. But the biggest blow came when the judge ordered an accounting of all her hidden assets. That's when things got even messier. S lawyer immediately filed an emergency motion, claiming I was trying to cheat her out of her rightful inheritance, which was total BS. She was trying to spin everything as if she was the victim, as if I was the one stealing from her. But I had the receipts, the bank statements, the emails, proof that she'd been doing exactly that. In the days following the hearing, things spiraled further out of control. Retaliated by suing me for half the house, claiming her entitled share of our assets. She argued that her inheritance should be considered joint property because she'd used some of the funds to improve the house, even though I knew that was a blatant lie. The court case dragged on, and every day I felt more drained. I was angry at her, but also heartbroken. I kept asking myself how the woman I'd loved for so long could do this to me, to us. Meanwhile, I kept working with my lawyer to uncover more. I hired a private investigator to look into her financials further. Turns out she'd been funneling money into offshore accounts, trying to hide her true worth. I even found out she'd been in contact with another lawyer in a different state, possibly planning to move assets or even run away. The betrayal was so deep. I could barely breathe. It was like she was trying to erase me, erase our life together. The worst part was realizing how much she'd manipulated everyone, her family, her friends, telling them I was abusive or controlling, when in fact she was the one secretly planning her escape. She painted herself as the victim, but I knew the truth. I knew she'd been lying to everyone, hiding her real intentions. It made me furious, but also scared. I had to be careful because I knew she was dangerous in her own way, willing to do whatever it took to get her way. I started to see the bigger picture. This wasn't just about money anymore. It was about power, control, and betrayal. I had lost trust in her completely, but I also realized I had to protect myself and my kids from her manipulations. I was tired of the lies, tired of feeling like I'd been played. I just wanted this nightmare to end, to reclaim what was rightfully mine, and to start rebuilding my life without her. I knew she wasn't going to give up easily, but I was prepared to fight to the very end. This wasn't over yet, and I wasn't about to let her walk away with everything she tried to steal from me. The legal battles dragged on for months, and every day felt like a new assault on my sanity. Continued her attempts to manipulate the system, filing motions, claiming she was entitled to more, arguing that her inheritance was separate property, trying to spin the story that I was a controlling, jealous husband trying to ruin her. It was exhausting, but I had my lawyer and I had the evidence. I knew I was in the right, even if she kept trying to paint me as the bad guy. One of the hardest moments came when she filed a counterclaim, demanding half the house and accusing me of financial abuse because I'd discovered her secret transfers. She claimed I'd been controlling, that I'd been gaslighting her into giving up her rights. I couldn't believe her audacity. She was the one secretly transferring money, hiding assets, planning her escape, and now she was trying to turn it around and make me look like the villain. The court saw through her BS, but it still hurt. I wondered how much more she'd lie, how much more. She tried to manipulate everyone around her. Meanwhile, I kept digging into her finances. I hired forensic accountants to trace every dollar. Turns out she'd been funneling money into offshore accounts under fake names, trying to hide her wealth. I found evidence of her contacting lawyers in multiple states, possibly trying to set up a new life elsewhere. It was clear she was planning to disappear with her inheritance and whatever else she could grab. The betrayal was so deep I felt like I was drowning in it. How could she do this to me? To our family? The emotional toll was brutal. I felt angry, betrayed, and helpless. I kept replaying all those nights I suspected she was lying, all those little lies she told me to cover her tracks. I kept asking myself how I missed the signs, how I let her get away with it for so long. But I also knew I had to stay strong for me, for our kids, for the truth. I wasn't going to let her ruin everything we built. I had to keep fighting, no matter how exhausted I was. One day, I sat in my lawyer's office, staring at the latest filings, was demanding a share of the inheritance, claiming she'd contributed to the house's value, even though I knew she'd been secretly draining our accounts. My lawyer looked at me and said, "You're in a strong position. We have all the proof we need. She's trying to manipulate the court, but her lies won't hold up." That gave me a small glimmer of hope. I realized I wasn't alone in this fight and that I had the truth on my side. But the worst part was knowing she was still out there, scheming, trying to outmaneuver me at every turn. Every time I thought I had a handle on things, she'd come back with some new claim or motion. I knew I had to be ready for the final showdown. I was tired of the lies, tired of the betrayal, but I refused to give up. I was going to see this through to the end. I wanted her to face the consequences of what she'd done, losing her claim to the house, her share of the inheritance, and whatever other assets she'd been trying to hide. Deep down, I knew this wasn't just about money. It was about my dignity, my trust, my sense of stability. I'd loved her once, but now I saw her for what she really was, a manipulative, selfish woman who'd thrown our marriage away for her own greed. I had to move on, even if it hurt like hell. I had to rebuild my life from the ground up, free of her lies and deception. The road ahead was uncertain, but I was determined. I wasn't going to let her take everything without a fight. This was my stand, and I was ready to win it. The final court hearing was as intense as I imagined. Showed up with her lawyer, looking desperate but still trying to hold her composure. She threw every possible accusation, saying I was controlling, that I'd manipulated her into giving up her rights, that I'd coerced her into hiding assets. It was classic blame everyone else for her own actions. But I was ready. I had all the evidence laid out, everything documented, everything to prove her lies. When the judge finally spoke, he was clear. He dismissed her claims about her inheritance being separate property because she hadn't provided any legal proof of that. The court ordered her to return the stolen funds, and it awarded me full control of the house. It also ordered an audit of her offshore accounts and froze her assets pending further investigation. I could feel a huge weight lift off my shoulders. For the first time in months, I felt like I was reclaiming my life. After the rulings, demeanor changed. She was furious, of course, but also defeated. She tried to argue, to threaten, but it was all empty words. She knew she'd lost. I watched her walk out of the courtroom, her face twisted with anger and betrayal, knowing she was going to face the consequences of her greed and lies. I felt a strange mixture of relief and sadness. Relief that the nightmare was finally over, but sadness for what we'd lost, for the trust that was shattered beyond repair. In the weeks that followed, I worked tirelessly to rebuild my life. I filed for divorce, finalized the legal separation, and took steps to protect what was left of my assets. The inheritance was returned to her, but I made sure it was legally separated from our joint estate. I also moved out of the house, not because I wanted to leave, but because I couldn't face living in the place that had become a symbol of her betrayal. I found a small apartment nearby and started focusing on my kids, who deserve stability and love after everything. Looking back, I realize how much I've learned from this nightmare. Trust is everything, but it can be broken in an instant. Never ignore the small signs, those little gut feelings you brush aside. People can hide a lot behind a pretty face or a convincing story. I also learned that sometimes you have to fight for what's right, even if it means tearing everything down first. Justice isn't always easy, but it's worth fighting for. Most importantly, I've come to understand that you can't control someone else's choices, but you can control how you respond. I won't lie. This experience changed me. I'm more cautious now, more guarded, but also more aware of what I deserve. I want to believe in love again, but I'll never ignore the warning signs. I hope my story serves as a warning to anyone out there who might be walking a similar path. Don't be afraid to look beneath the surface. Don't let someone's lies destroy. You stand up, fight for yourself, and trust your instincts. Because in the end, the truth always finds a way to come out. And when it does, you'll be glad you fought for it.